As promised a couple of times in my previous videos, we're doing the Valentine's Day themed frogs today. And hi, hey, hello. If you're new here, my name is Rain. If you're not new here, welcome back. I really appreciate you stopping on by to my little corner of the internet. And in today's video, I'm going to be drawing just casually a bunch of frogs. So if you feel like getting creative alongside me, I would love to hear about it or see it either in the comments below or tag me somewhere. If you have the time to watch all the way through to the end of this video, I would really appreciate it. And with that being said, I think the intro's over, so let's get into talking about the frogs. I think I might have mentioned it in last week's video, maybe the week before. I am a little bit under the weather, so we're not here with full brain cells this week. But I've found in my practicing drawing frogs so far that frogs are definitely among the animals that I'm not entirely certain I actually figured out how to illustrate in my art style in a reasonable way. I think that would make sense. I've kind of noticed so far that the actual process of illustrating a frog for me is not necessarily something that I like to do in a realistic style, and because a realistic style isn't the right way to articulate it. My art very clearly isn't realism, but what I'm trying to articulate is that frogs for me so far are definitely something that I have found I enjoy doing in a much more kind of cutesy and maybe perhaps a little bit more childish kind of approach than my usual illustrations. I've just been having a really hard time drawing frogs that actually have similar anatomy to a real life frog so far, which feels kind of weird and silly to say, but I'm just in my sketchbook trying to draw frogs. I have been finding that the actual shape of a frog just doesn't appeal to me when actually drawing. Even when I'm trying to emulate it and I'm really looking at my reference, I feel like the actual process just doesn't click for me. And so it's not the worst, but I've definitely found that the more round, rotund, clearly playful kind of frog approach is the version of a frog that comes natural to me and appeals to me when putting pencil to paper. And so I definitely don't know if frogs are necessarily something that suit my art style so far. And that's not you shouldn't draw things that don't look a certain way. It's that I haven't figured out exactly how to make it fit in my art style yet. What I'm saying is the frogs that I'm drawing today, I don't necessarily know make sense if I were to put them in an illustration with a character portrait or something. If I'm drawing a scene, I don't know that I figured out how to draw frogs in a way where they don't look out of place based on how I'm drawing them. But at the same time, I think they're really, really cute. I love them and they're dorky, and I have a really fun time illustrating these frogs, drawing them. And overall, I'm not entirely mad that I haven't figured out how to draw a frog correctly yet, because the little foot nubbies that I end up giving them are absolutely just the highlight of my day. I don't know if it's sick brain, but little toeless frog nubs are absolutely the cutest, most brilliant concept ever, and I love them so much. So, I mean, you win some, you lose some, but I definitely am really overjoyed with how some of the frogs turned out, and I'm really, really excited to talk about them a bit more. However, on top of that, I feel like I still haven't fully got the swing of drawing a frog yet. You know, am I happy with them? Absolutely. Do I think they're adorable? Yes. However, I think that they are still something that I need to practice a lot more and draw a little bit more semi-regularly so that I actually kind of get in the feel of the shape that I like and the eye placement and making them look kind of right more quickly. A couple of the frogs in today's video I definitely think end up a little bit goofy. Not in a like charming sense, but in a like I don't think I figured it out correctly sense, and it's definitely not bad. I still think they're adorable, but it's definitely something where I can now look at it and say, I need to develop my skill set in this particular category. And I need to hone these skills a bit more. Um, and I think it's going to work out pretty well, but it's part of the creative process for me where I really feel like it's important to be able to look at your own drawings and then say, this is a shortcoming I have and I need to like think about that more the next time, or this looks a little bit goofy when you're like looking at it in retrospect, and then take that moving forward. So I want to talk about a couple of things that I think make the frogs look dorky closer to the end of this video. But for now, let's talk about how I actually figured out and concluded how I think frogs should look in my art style, and figuring out the balance between a more realistic approach and a fully cartoon, rotund, frog boy, baby, adorable approach, real quick, because I think it's a very interesting aspect of being an artist and also having a skill set that is predominantly portrait based. I always find when I figure out the perfect medium or I get really close for something that's really out of my wheelhouse and my usual illustration, is really interesting to explore. How do you actually like come to that conclusion? And then additionally, how do you recognize the components of your art style that are most important to you and kind of incorporate that into something where it's perhaps a little bit more difficult, like moving from portraiture to animals, because I do not draw animals like ever, right? So let's talk about it a little bit. Super quickly, for people who are new to the channel, I focus almost exclusively on character illustration and portraits, predominantly in the fantasy field, disability representation, fan art, cute character designs. Like I'm doing funguary this year, not like fully, but I am doing and have finished some illustrations for funguary this year so far. So I mostly do character designs and portraits, you know, things like that. And one of the things that I have set out to start working on more in my art practice is learning how to draw animals, right? And it's not because I want to draw animals. However, I think it is, or not however, but rather, I think instead that learning to and pushing myself to create things that are very out of my standard wheelhouse is important for me to continue developing my art style and figuring out exactly what my artistic values are when it comes to representing myself on paper. Because I'm of the belief that, yes, your art style is something that comes naturally and intrinsically to you as you develop as an artist and you grow with time. However, some things don't necessarily work on certain subjects, right? And that is not an excuse, for the record, to not draw like certain things. And that is not an excuse to like draw things incorrectly to a point that it creates stereotypes or it hurts other communities, to be very, very clear. Rather, what I'm trying to say is the way that I tend to draw noses and eyeballs doesn't really apply to a frog, right? Like, frogs don't have human eyeballs, and there are no noses here. So the things that are really important to me for the like 5,000 different ways I draw noses, because I can't figure out how to draw noses, even though I draw them every day and I change my mind every day, um, aren't applicable to a frog. And so, how do I figure that out as somebody who literally next to never draws animals, right? How do I figure out what my art style looks like when some of those features that I draw really regularly don't even exist here, right? If I'm translating this to a different animal, at the very least, if I draw something like a cat, there's still like a nose and a little bit more kind of human-ish, very much not human, but there's a bit more of a human quality to the shape of an eyeball. So how am I going to figure this out for frogs, and how is it going to still feel like me as an artist? How is my creative pursuit going to still feel kind of cohesive and right? If I want to draw frogs, how would I draw them if I were to never be able to pull up a reference in a situation? And how do I create frogs in a way that will come naturally to me now that I've figured it out? Which is most important, I think, as an artist, is how do you and what do you need to do for something to feel like second nature? And I don't really know that you need to be able to draw no questions asked, like don't need a reference, but if somebody asks you to draw something, you know what you want at the very least. You have an idea of where to start. And for me, when going into something completely different than what I usually draw, it is like, give me a minute. I need to like actually test this multiple times before I can give you a frog, right? I need to draw like 30 deer before I can draw a deer. I would rather die than draw a deer. I have no idea how to draw things with hooves, okay? To be very clear. But that's what I'm trying to get at when I'm saying, like, how do I approach this? And so, one thing that is very, very common in my art style and very much consistent throughout all of my illustrations is I love circles, which is stupid, but hear me out. I just have a natural inclination to defining the face through things like circles. I like putting circles in random places to put intrigue. They're not random, but they probably appear a little bit random, you know? I like putting circles on things that have curves naturally on the body, ovals, and then following the path. So it sounds a little bit weird, and if you've never seen my art before, it would be like I put circles under the eyes on humans. I put circles usually along the tummy region, like the curve of the underside of the tummy pudge, the shoulders. And I also like cutting off things with curved lines for nothing but intrigue. And it's usually not a shadow line. It's just that I like the way it looks, and I like the way it helps to define the curve of the body. It creates an intrigue, it creates a line that I can focus on, and frankly, even if they probably don't make much sense to other people, they very much appeal to me. So I generally put a curved line going from the upper part of the thigh to the mid part of the thigh, using that to kind of define the shadow a little bit, but it is purely an aesthetic thing and not actually something that applies to the shadows, right? I like to put them on the like mid forearm or underside of the wrist, right? Things like that. And without seeing my character portraits, it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I do incorporate a fair bit of these characteristics to these frog drawings. So it'll make sense as I render them and they become a little bit more prevalent. But let's start with my favor for circles and how that was basically one of the initial things that helped me make my decision, right? So I did draw in my free time, a bunch of frogs from reference, trying to emulate the kind of natural frog shape, whatever you would describe that as being, because it's not, I don't know, it's frog shaped. I don't know what that shape would be best described as, but I did try, and I didn't like it, and it wasn't feeling right. So when it came to simplifying the shape of the body, circles were very much the first step to trying to figure it out. Take away some of the kind of edges to the frog, and now let's try and actually define it as a basic simple shape that I can then expand upon if I want to. So in my practice, I drew basically straight circles, gave them legs and stuff like that. And slowly, I simplified the shape more and more. Do I want the toes? No. Then no toes it is, right? Do I just want nubs? Yes, then that's how it's going to be. And once I figured out those primary values, those things that are important to me when it comes to the frog and defining it, then I started getting a little bit more carefree and figuring out the more ovally shape and just rounding out a frog shape, basically. That way I can draw and kind of represent different types of frogs, because some frogs are just, no matter how hard you try, they're just not going to look great as a circle. If you're someone like me whom doesn't really know a lot about frogs and then doesn't know what the necessary distinctive things would be to articulate those distinctions to other people, right? Like, I don't know. Frogs are very, very far out of my predominant field. Like, I don't think frogs were ever mentioned in botany, ever. And I don't really remember talking about them in zoology either. So, like, frogs are a huge, like, my brain gone. I know nothing about frogs, right? Nada. None. Zilch. I just know that I try to avoid letting my dogs lick them when they're weirded out and confused and they're all over the property in the rain. So, and that's it. Like, that's the extent of it. They were my grandpa's favorite animal. That really doesn't help me here, okay? So, which it should. To be clear, it should. I have so many, like, partially humanoid frogs that we got when he passed away, like, around my property. Like, I have a bunch of frogs standing like a human would, holding things, wearing, like, dapper clothing. Like, it's insane how many frogs we ended up with after my grandpa passed, okay? I really should have started drawing frogs sooner. But, additionally, that's a large part of the reason why I chose frogs as the first animal in figuring out how to draw more animals and trying to define my style beyond humans and finding my kind of fit and what comes naturally to me. I see a lot of frogs. There are a metric ton of them around here during the rainy seasons. Like, constantly, you can't go anywhere. You have to, like, literally look where you're going or you will step on a frog. Insufferable. And additionally, I have weird artisan versions of frogs all over my property. Like, I see them all the time, every day. There are frogs in my house, like, existing as weird ornament stuff. I mean, we have frog Christmas tree ornaments, okay? Like, the frog thing is very just unavoidable in my life, right? So, it felt like the perfect fit, and I see them a lot, so I have a subconscious kind of opinion and idea of different ways artists can represent frogs, which is another thing that I think is really important when trying to figure out your approach to drawing something that you're not super familiar with, right? How do other artists create it? And surrounding yourself with a bunch of artists who have very similar and then drastically different styles to you can help you figure out your values and understanding what it is that other people choose when they're trying to simplify a frog to its basest, most natural possible form. Especially for somebody who doesn't draw animals like me, you can really quickly kind of get a feel for or a bit better of an understanding of what it is that actually helps to define a frog to other people who are looking, right? How do other artists bring a frog and simplify them to literally the bare basics, right? How simple can you make a frog for like super simplistic and maybe more child illustration oriented books? Like comes to mind immediately. How simple can you get and have people still identify, oh yeah, that's a frog? That's really helpful for me when trying to figure out my place and kind of identifying what I need to remember to incorporate when figuring out something like this to still have it read clear to other people and to help me figure out where I need to prioritize things, because that way I have a framework for how other people approach eradicating the more confusing features of frogs and bringing it to a still digestible format. Because realism and hyperrealism is very much not my thing. And one thing I can say about a master's degree in art, which I'm working on, is you don't have to even bother trying to learn realism, okay? Nobody's asked me, nobody wants it. They're just like, do your art, kid, okay? I have been completely set free. So I can say with moderate confidence that I suck at realism. Like beyond suck, like incomprehensibly bad at it. And so it really helps to bring things down to the most basic possible shape and go from there. So circles were the choice. They were the one that felt most natural to me. And frankly, I don't know a lot of art styles where frogs being something like a rectangle would have made sense, but I mean, so maybe it's just the best choice for a frog in general. But that's how I went about approaching the oval circle approach and deciding to do just nubs for legs. The toes were not working for me, okay? I could not make the toes not look demonic, okay? Like those things were going to hurt people, okay? Like those toes were wrong. They were criminal, and I just didn't know how to fix it. So get rid of them. I am like 75% of the belief that if you're struggling to draw something, you should push yourself to figure it out. However, equally so, the other 25% of me is if it just continues to look wrong, you're getting frustrated, you're having a terrible time, and you can omit that feature and still have it read, cut it out. And then try again in the future. But for now, for the sake of somebody who is learning, if you're trying to draw something and you think you can do without it, then go more simple, right? You don't need a complicated illustration. And for the sake of doing something as silly and dorky and fun as Valentine's Day themed frogs, nobody cares about the toes. Okay, like I know none of you guys are like, dang, wow, I really desperately wanted those toes, those frog toes in my life. My life is literally ruined. How will I ever move on now that I haven't seen Rain's interpretation of frog toes? Like, I know y'all are good. At the very least, you will come to understand that it's okay, right? Like, you'll forgive me probably eventually if you are that devastated over the lack of frog toes. They weren't working for me, and at the end of the day, I really did want to just draw some Valentine's Day themed frogs, and I know it's the 15th that this video is going up. I know, I'm sorry. But I wasn't going to upload on a Friday. I'm sick, man. I can't do it. But as an aside from that, I just wanted dorky frogs. And you know what? They look more dorky without the toes, so it works overall. However, I do intend to push myself to actually figure out the toes at a later date and actually kind of figure that out for my art style and see if I think it works better. I don't think they do. I think the nub frog approach is what comes most naturally to me. I did add toes to the top right frog, so hopefully it's okay. I don't know that the toes read as well as I really wanted them to, so perhaps it didn't actually really work out at all. But the toes just had to be eradicated, banished to the shadow realm. It was not working for me. And I wanted cute frogs, and you were not going to get 2 cute frogs if I put the toes on. Okay, they were wrong. They were so wrong. I do not know where I was going wrong, but it is definitely an issue for future me to figure out, not current me to figure out. So, that is going to just be put off to the side for at least a little bit longer. And then in terms of the rest of the illustrations, I have been finding that overall the circular dorky frogs makes sense. However, the eyes have been actually a bigger issue than I originally anticipated, and I'm yet to really figure out if I'm completely happy with the way that I actually approached the eyes of the frogs. There are 2 where I just did like dots, like outright just dots. I didn't create any like white iris-ish. Is it still called the whites of the eyes if it's a frog? Because frogs' eyes aren't naturally white, are they? This is a question that I can't answer, okay? I need to not think about it while I'm sick. I will revisit this in a week, personally. But some of them I did dots, and some of them I did do the circle. And I was finding that I don't like the way frogs look in my art style. I don't like the way the frogs look when the black of their eye, the pupil, is like tiny. I did it for the biggest frog to try and make it work, but there's just something about it that makes me really uncomfortable. And I really like when the pupil like covers almost the entirety of the iris. I got it right this time. Or do they not have irises because there is no white to the... Oh my god, I'm too sick for this. I can't do this to myself. Oh, but like the pupil, the rest of the eyeball, right? When the pupil doesn't take up almost the entirety of that space, it makes me kind of uncomfortable. Like visually, I really hate the way it looks, and it makes me uneasy for some reason. I can't explain it. I don't know what it is yet. So, for the most part, I did my best to have the pupil take up a large part of that space and make it really difficult to see any other distinction. I think I kind of figured it out with the big frog, at least a way to make it look a little bit less like he's gonna kill you. But I still don't like it. And stylistically speaking, I think it might just need to be something that I forego. Like, all frogs have the largest pupils on the planet, okay? I think that might be what I need to do because the small pupil just weirds me out and makes me uncomfortable. And I'm not entirely sure what it is, but I just don't like it at all. The dots I found do work, but I'm not sure if it works for every frog. Like, top right frog is a flat, grumpy, angry boy. He hates me, and he's going to make me know it, okay? This thing is probably doing the frog equivalency of a growl at me, right? Grumpy boy. So him having little just dot eyes makes sense. I don't think it'll work for every style of frog. Some frogs really need those massive, massive eyeballs. And they need to come off of the face, which you can't really do if you have dots, right? And so I haven't figured out the perfect balance yet. I think it's just going to be a case-by-case basis. You know, some frogs, it just comes naturally to me. Other frogs, it's like, no, you definitely need the full circle eyeball. But I'm leaning a little bit more towards full circle, large pupil. And I think it's just going to be a comfort thing. Something I'll maybe get more intuitive with over time. Like, I can just do it and not actually really think about it. But for now, I think it's something where I need to really look at it and think which one of these is the better option, which one of these do I like more for the sake of these frogs. And with those, I think I've covered most of the primary characteristics of a frog that I needed to translate. I did give 2 frogs booty cheeks. We'll talk about it later. That was for my own personal amusement, and there was no stylistic intelligence applied to that. It just happened, and I didn't think about it. So when we get there was no decision process for it. I don't even think I realized I did it until I was in the rendering process trying to actually make them distinct from each other. So, regarding that, I have no excuse for that. I don't have an intelligent thought behind why some frogs have booty cheeks. I'm sure there are frogs that have distinct butt regions and they are kind of separated looking, and that it is anatomically correct for some species of frog out there. But I'm not mentally here enough to actually figure that out just to explain that I wanted to give frogs butts. Like, I'm gonna be honest, there was no deeper thought to it. I wanted to see what it would look like, and now I know. And I like it. I think frogs should have cute little butts. Okay, that's it. That's it. I can't explain myself. I can't justify my actions. That's just what it is. So, with that being said, I hope I covered some of those decision-making processes. I did draw these frogs real sick, so maybe next week I'll look at these and I'll be like, wow, I can't believe I posted this video. These are the ugliest things I've ever made. But for now, I think they're adorable. So, let's hope that I have that mindset when I come through the sick fog. But I hope that kind of covers some of those decision-making processes that helped me figure out exactly where I am with frogs for now and how I figured out how to incorporate them into my style a little bit. So we're now going to move on to talking about some of my color decisions and the struggles and the easier parts and kind of how that all came into play. So, color decisions. Let's start really quickly with Valentine's Day. So, I don't like Valentine's Day. I don't celebrate it. I kind of hate it. But I do think that the cutesy love theme is fun and playful, and I enjoy engaging in creating art that surrounds it. However, I don't really see a point in having a designated day of the year to be romantic and overly affectionate with your partner. Perhaps that's an attitude of getting in a relationship with your partner when you're both young and, being in a long-term relationship for 7 years whilst also only being not very old. So my partner and I are high school sweethearts basically. So maybe it's something to do with having been together for a long time and something like that. But I've always never really cared for Valentine's Day or understood the need for it, like socially, and like the capitalistic component of it. However, artistically speaking, I think it's absolutely adorable. I love a good cutesy little pastel themed thing here or there, especially because my art generally leans a little bit more dark, heavily shadowed. My digital art tends to be baroque-ish, very dark, sharp shadows, but very, very bright highlights and earthy tone for digital work. Then when it comes to tangible illustrations, I try to push my darkest darks to the best of my ability. My photography, I usually edit it to be a bit dark, and I only really go shooting when it's overcast and I can get a little bit more of a natural darkness to my photos. So generally, I lean a little bit more dark with my illustrations in terms of color choices and stuff like that. And so even when I am usually working in soft purples and bright pinks, I end up pushing a pretty harsh shadow. And it usually has a bit of an overcast to it. Not always, but it's generally usually where I lean. So a designated opportunity to just be like, you're going to be fun, you're going to be pastel, and you're not going to push harsh shadows, you're going to be a little bit more soft. It's enjoyable for me. It's a good break from the mindset I'm usually in when rendering, and it's also a good challenge, to not push super harsh shadows and make these frogs look like they're, I don't know, figuring out that they're third wife is actually not dead and about to come collect the inheritance they got from the poison or something like that. Just it's a little bit less depressing and a little bit more playful, I guess. And so I like the challenge every once in a while. But equally, pink is not a color I work well in, which is really funny to say after my last video because I worked on finishing up the wrinkled peach mushroom illustration, but it really isn't my color. I don't know if I talked about it much last week because I don't remember last week right now, but pink is a color that I don't usually work in very much. It's not a color I feel inclined to, and I generally don't really like it. I don't know what it is, but I find it hard to put dark shadows on. It doesn't always look good with a deep, deep purple shadow because you're moving to that pink light. And dark pinks just don't usually get the depth that I want when it comes to like markers, right? Because I'm a person who works in mediums that are pre-mixed, almost exclusively, even though I have some paint and I can paint a little bit, I don't mix my own colors, right? And I just find no one really produces a pink that gives me that muted kind of depressing feeling that I like with my shadows a lot of the time. So I usually don't have a very good time trying to actually render a pink to the extremes that I want it to be in. But when it comes to illustrating frogs that aren't supposed to be depressed or 3 times divorced, it works. And I put a really deliberate goal on myself to not put super harsh shadows on the frogs. And I know the shadows are looking intense, but when it comes all together and I do the paint overlay, I promise it'll make more sense what I mean. And also, I don't put harsh blacks all over the place to push my sense of depth, right? The goal was to be a lot softer than usual, and I really like how it turned out. However, deciding the actual base colors was a little bit more difficult. I'm not like saying Ohuhu does pink bad, but I don't think they have a pink that suits like my general preferences. I really like a muted, dull color for my base colors if possible. And I definitely think that the pinks were a little bit closer to highlighter, right? Like, I don't want fully muted. Like, if you look at the purple base that I chose, and it's still pretty visible, it's not the most muted purple, but it's definitely not like highlighter purple like the pink is. But this pink was the best pink I found that had a good color family for the sake of shadows, right? There were enough other pinks where I felt like I could easily blend out and create a harmony when it came to the actual kind of rendering process, right? And then I remembered like halfway through that I'm not planning to do much shading with the markers because I'm doing paint overlays and this is supposed to be quick, right? I know it's hard for me, but this is supposed to be a quick artistic process, at least comparatively. So let's get into the actual shadow decisions now. For the record, yes, I know the like bright red frog eyes was a horrible idea. I really thought it would look nicer. I'm sorry. I fixed it quickly and I cut out the like 2 minutes where it was like a prevalent issue. So just pretend they don't exist for a second. Now, when it comes to the shadow decision, I am pretty good working either light to dark or dark to light. I can pull it off. However, I was having a hard time finding darks that I felt really worked. And once again, it's probably because I don't work with pink very often. And I'm not super fluent in the shape of frog so far. So might be that, might just be some other unfortunate aspect. But I did go in with the darkest purple paint pen that I had just to start the initial process of pushing some of the limbs backwards and helping me to define what exactly I wanted to be super dark, and then also selecting the edges of the frogs that I wanted to be the shadowed side, because I was starting to have a really hard time remembering where I wanted the light sources to be. And so, yes, I do have the shadows directly under the frogs that I have placed with marker, but putting that super dark line and helping me to distinguish it was really helpful for me in actually figuring out what I was doing. And that's also helped by I usually work with really strong line art, and while I'm moving away from that in my art style, like not leaving the line art, to be very clear, but I'm moving away from doing my line art before rendering because it's kind of useless with paint pens. You know, I have to kind of line after anyway. So I'm working on getting more fluent in it. But with the frogs, I was having a really hard time distinguishing where there was shadow and then where I actually wanted the frog to be, figuring out, like, did I just, like, over push a marker? Did it bleed a little bit? Or is this what I want it to look like, right? I was getting kind of confused. And so putting those sharp lines on the bottom were pretty important. Then from there, instead of actually building up the shadows, I decided to take a different color that was a slight more orange hue and start actually defining where I wanted highlights and vibrancy instead. Because frankly, I'm not having a good time at this point because I am sick in this video. And secondly, I don't have a pink that's dark enough, and the red looks awful with these frogs. I tested it out on a little doodle frog. The red that I have looked terrible. So instead I started going in with other colors and creating more brightness, creating light sources and little shines from a brighter color to kind of push their body as a little bit more of a shadow. And what I already have from just kind of trying to define the shapes, making that look a little bit more kind of in light, I guess, or creating a sense of depth. From there, I started taking that same dark purple, or nope, that's a different dark purple. I started taking a different dark purple and blending out those dark lines and kind of creating a very soft distinction. I don't even think my phone can pick it up, but the objective with it was to kind of start blending the dark with a lighter color, because what happens usually with these Arrtx paint pens is if you have a really light color and you put it over a dark one, you could see through pretty well. Like, it's not, these Arrtx paint pens are not fully opaque. And so if you lay down multiple dark colors and then let it dry, of course, but then go over it with a lighter pink or a lighter purple, it will kind of just overcoat and create this kind of harmonious, softer shadow. And I was hoping that would work with the frogs, so they end up looking a little bit weird on the bottom for a minute there, but the intention was, when placing these shadows, was to go over in a light color with the knowledge that I should be able to see those shadows through, but it'll be drastically toned down from overlaying it with the brighter color, and it'll feel a little bit more harmonious. That's the hope, 9 times out of 10. Then additionally, the lack of pupils was starting to bother me from laying over them in that lighter pink, because the magenta red thing was a horrible decision, and I don't know what came over me to have ever thought that that was a good thing to consider for even a millisecond, but I did it, and then I did it to all of them. Like, I kept committing the same sin over and over and over again. What was I thinking? I have no idea, but it was a horrible idea. Then, of course, I get a little bit excited and I start adding some circles here and there, but we're going to ignore them. I'm trying to behave. But the darker colors, laying them over, was starting to get a little bit stressful. Honestly, usually darks are what I work best in, but there's just something about the frogs where I was just having a horrible time getting the sense of depth that I wanted, and I was getting pretty nervous eventually. Like, do I know what I'm doing? Do I know how to color at all? The answer to that is technically probably not. To be honest, like, coloring is the weirdest thing for me. I didn't know how to color, and then it just kind of came over me one day, and I still don't think that I know what I'm doing. It's definitely one of those aspects of art and art creation where I authentically don't know if I'm doing it right or wrong. And it's fun and all, but it gets really nerve-wracking when you're trying to make cute frogs and your cute frogs kind of look like they did no substances for the sake of the YouTube gods not shoving this video into the pit. The no substances is the best way to articulate what they looked like they were doing before I overlaid the eyes. And so I am not entirely sure I ever actually figured out what was wrong with the coloring for some of these frogs. Just some of them were working way better than others. I will say the big frog in the middle and the bottom left frogs are the frogs that I think that I just never actually got the colors how I wanted them to. And I don't know what I want them to look like. I just know that they don't look finished the way I had wanted. And I'm not sure what would have solved that, to be honest. I have guesses, but I'm not sure. I am thinking, though, that maybe adding complementary colors into the pink ones would have helped fix a lot of the problems that I was starting to have and made the frogs look a little bit more, I don't know. Natural's not the word when you're talking about bright pink frogs, but I can't think of a replacement word for natural. But my absolute favorite frog, and I know it's amazing, I have a favorite for once, but my favorite frog is the super tiny one in the top / middle right, like the top third bottom right, the one that has the heart. He's my little guy. I love him. He is my son. No one can stop me. That is a best boy right there. Okay, glorious little guy. He's my favorite. And I think what makes him so appealing to me is the colors, right? I never actually went back in with the bright pink after I started adding the orange highlights to try and make them look a little bit more in the space, right? And so I think what happened is it's not an orangey orange. It's a very yellow orange, something soft, something sweet, kind of creamy almost, a kind of creamy orangey yellow. And because of that, it is almost complementary, but not quite, right? Because yellow and purple are complementary colors. And so that yellowy orange and that soft purple look really, really nice together, right? They really stand out, and it just creates this very harmonious feeling that I think the other frogs don't have, because I went back in with the pink after adding the orange highlights, and it just went back to being a little bit too overbearing. And I think that's what I needed to do. I needed to play into my strengths a little bit more, which is kind of just soft but awkward complimentaries. Like, not quite complimentary, but close enough to complimentary that it just feels nice, right? And I think when it came to it, I always use purple as a shadow color, right? However, when it came to these purple frogs, I kept adding the pink to them to try and create more depth and a sense of harmony throughout the entire page. And what I think happened there is I wasn't playing into what I know best, and I was kind of just trying to create a sense of a sense of cohesion between all of the frogs. And in doing that, I kind of forgot that pink is not my color. I just don't use it. I don't understand it super well. And so adding it to colors that I am really good with and I work a lot with, I wasn't really sure what I was doing, and I was just trying to trust instinct, but it wasn't really working out this week. Usually I could just go with the flow and things work out well enough, but I think I really needed to say, pink isn't something I'm super familiar with, and this left it out of the purple frogs, and continued using my purple on the pink frogs, because that is a common shadow color for me. I am really familiar with it, really comfortable working with it, and so I think it was more so just me not actually thinking about the colors and trying to apply more thought to it, and I just kept going. But I'm overall, I'm not mad about it. I just really think that the purple and orange combo was perfect, And I should have left the purple frogs alone and not re-added the pink afterwards. The little leaf guy, unfortunately, I think he was destined to always look a little bit funky. I don't know what happened to him. Somewhere from sketch to marker, I think that he just got a little bit lopsided, and in that he kind of became a little bit more difficult to find in the fog. And I don't know that he was ever destined to look how I wanted him to. But I am determined to redraw him one day and give him the cheeks he deserves, because he was supposed to have a dumpy, and he doesn't. I'm sorry. It didn't work out how I wanted. I didn't render it well. But overall, I think it's okay. I didn't feel like I had the colors I wanted to overlay. So, as always, color pencil is the second best bet. And I do think that it helped create a little bit more of a blend for the colors that were a little bit funky. But I'm not really sure that it was enough to, save the issues I was starting to have and, struggle with throughout the entire piece. Overall, color pencils can only do so much for kind of a bad underlayer. And I don't think that I really actually found the actual point that I wanted these frogs to look like, and lost the plot a little bit. But the color pencils did help a little bit, and so I can't be too upset with it. And I definitely pulled some of it back together, but I don't know, it wasn't exactly where I wanted it to be or how I wanted it to work out in terms of the overlay. I wanted it to be a little bit more harmonizing and create a soft shadow, but instead I was using it to try and blend in my pinks being super different. And I think that was just me choosing really bad color choices for the actual base body layer. I think I just never actually swatched all of my pinks and figured out which ones looked best together. I just went with what looked like they would be close enough and hoped. And I think that definitely bit me later. And yeah, swatch your stuff, guys. Don't be me. You'll regret it. I regret it. But let's move on to the next topic. I wanted to very, very briefly at the end of this video, and by very briefly, you can look at the timestamp. We're at 52 minutes out of 59. Maybe an hour straight. We know the outro is not going to be that long. So, brief means 8 minutes. But I wanted to really briefly just put out the reminder that I talk about a lot on my channel, and it's that you need to create art for yourself, your own enjoyment, and that you are your greatest critic, right? And that entering a mindset, a learning mindset, a trial and error mindset, and a mindset that allows you to kind of determine your own worth and value as an artist is really one of the best things you can do for yourself. And now that I have been in a better headspace, I've kind of relocated myself as an artist, and I'm feeling a lot better. I've talked about it. I had a really bad art slump that I didn't even realize was related to people in my life for the majority of 2024. And I'm feeling better again, and I finally have re-entered the mindset that I love so much, which is this idea that you create for the sake of creating, and that you are the sole decider of your artistic worth. Maybe, if you're a professional artist, other people will place some limiters on that philosophy, but equally so, you should never let other people trying to decide your worth kind of put you down. And so let's talk about how ugly some of these frogs were, but the fact that I think they're adorable and I'm very happy. So when you adopt a mindset as an artist where you are capable of kind of acknowledging that you're creating art that maybe isn't perfect, creating art that might not appeal to most people, and more importantly, when you're learning something new, when you enter the mindset that you as an artist, your worth is defined by you, and that you can sit down and make an entire sheet of frogs despite not knowing how to draw frogs, and say, this is really good for what I was expecting, and this is really good for my skill set. It allows you to free yourself of some of those other limiters that can be really hard mentally for artists to overcome a lot of the time. It's not uncommon for us to be our greatest critics. We usually are our greatest critics, us artists, and so when you can look at your attempts at learning something new, and when you can push yourself to perceive these new experiences as a step in the right direction, it makes all of the shortcomings feel like nothing, honestly. Like, really, everything that I don't like about these frogs is completely resolved by the fact that this is my first time sitting down and rendering frogs and trying to do an entire sheet of frogs. You know, I didn't start even trying to draw frogs ever until this year. And it's like halfway through February. Frankly, I think I did my sketchbook page of frogs like 2 weeks ago. So frogs are new to me. And so it makes even the ugliest of the frogs on this page feel like such a reward, because it's like, if this is what my bad looks like, my good is going to be so fulfilling when I get there, when I have honed the skill and I have found my groove. And I want to create more videos where I force myself to work on something that is out of my field, so that I have more opportunities to talk about how important these moments as artists are, because we have the ability to, when sitting down and looking at this, not we as in you created it and therefore you're having the feelings, but when we're trying something new, we have the ability to say, I hate this, this is awful, this isn't what I envisioned, and then not trying again. It is us who put ourselves down in that moment and have the ability to decide to never do something again or never try to draw something again, rather than continuing to hone and work on that skill and get to a point where we can be satisfied with our final products and actually achieve that skill set we need. And I think that that's a huge issue, particularly for most artists, just because not a lot of us are completely diversified in our strong suits, right? So I do portraits, character design, people. I draw people, right? So that's kind of what I focused on in the beginning, and so now everything else is perhaps never going to be quite as skilled as portraits, because that's what I want to do, that's what I like, that's what comes naturally, right? And every artist has that thing, in my opinion. I don't think there's any artist who truly is capable of drawing anything and everything perfectly in the same style, right? And not struggling and not needing to think about it, look at references to try and figure out just what is happening here. And it is moments like this where we push ourselves, where we need to appreciate the step we took and not really look at the bad as a shortcoming, but rather as the opportunity for the next step to improvement. And it is my hope that if I talk about this mindset and sitting down and looking at my not so perfect frogs that I love so much, it's that being able to sit down and acknowledge that, like, these are not my best work, right? But I love them, and I love what it means for me in the future, right? And by thinking like that, we allow ourselves to not be dampened by the creation of bad art. Not that these frogs are bad. I don't think they're bad. I just think they're not to my standards, right? But it allows us to create the worst of our worst so that we can create the best of our best. And if I don't talk about the mindset, I'm going to continue to crush myself every time a bad art week happens. So I need to project it and continue strengthening this resolve. But that's an aside. Zogert came here to say goodbye as well. I think that this is about a close for the video, so I really appreciate you sitting all the way through to the end of this video. Like if you like, dislike if you dislike, comment if you have any thoughts. I would love to know what your favorite frog is. Hopefully it's not the middle one, because I just crapped on it for a long time. But ultimately, if you got creative alongside me, tell me about it. I would love to hear about it, would love to support you the way that you support me. And I think that is it. So have a wonderful rest of your day, night, wherever you are. And with all of this being said, all of it coming to a close, goodbye!